Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the Coalition's newly released remaster for the cover shooter classic Gears of War Reloaded, and seeing how it compares visually to the original classic game first released back in 2006. Now, for those of you unfamiliar, Gears of War Reloaded does appear to be mostly a re-release of Gears of War Ultimate that was released back in 2016. So a lot of the observations discussed today will likely apply to that remake as well. But because I never had a chance to cover that title in this video series, this felt like a good opportunity to provide my thoughts on changes that the Coalition made here. However, there are still a few new features included with Reloaded too, including higher resolution and frame rate support on new consoles, improvements to overall stability, incremental visual enhancements like improved LOD, availability on Steam as opposed to the Microsoft Store, and for the first time in the series' near 20-year-long history, a chance for PlayStation players to join the fight. For this comparison, I'll be focusing primarily on the PC versions of Gears of War, with the graphics settings maxed out at a native 4K resolution. DLAA will be utilized with this latest Reloaded release, and post-processing effects like motion blur will be disabled to ensure cleaner image capture between all versions. Also, I'd like to thank Microsoft for providing the review codes for Gears of War Reloaded on various other platforms, which I'll discuss a bit in this video as well. Alright, so let's kick this comparison off by first talking about the character models, starting with the game's chief protagonist, Marcus Phoenix. Now right away, we can begin to pick apart a few major differences between these two versions, like the higher poly count, improved anti-aliasing, and arguably the most obvious change, that stark difference in how light interacts with the model itself. The harsh direct lighting of the original game almost drowns out a lot of the texture maps in Gears of War, likely to its benefit, as the texture resolution back in those days wasn't intended to be viewed at 4K. For this reason, you'll find certain signature details like Marcus's facial scar, his goatee, and the wrinkles of his skull cap stand out a great deal, giving the character his iconic look. However, thanks to the improved lighting techniques incorporated with the previous Ultimate remaster, the Coalition opted to provide a more realistic appearance for the model. The scarring along Marcus's face, for example, blends more naturally, as does the character's 5 o'clock shadow and skin tone. The armor paneling is also reflected more softly, avoiding that harsh white light reflection look you get with the original game. New details like scratches and dirt, and even a three-dimensional Gears insignia on his breastplate contribute greatly as well, replacing that muddy look of the metal plating from before. It's overall a big technical improvement, albeit there is an argument to be made that a bit of the stylistic appearance of the character is lost with the improved visual fidelity. This is even more true when looking at the supporting character Dom, who, like Marcus, is technically improved across the board, but artistically, he does feel very distant from his 2006 counterpart. One of the most problematic changes here is this overly clean look of the model by comparison, with all that dirt on the character's exposed skin removed, and that 1,000-yard stare lost in the process. Even his overly accentuated biceps have been toned down, despite the geometry of the arm itself being about the same. The armor textures are all much higher fidelity as expected, and there is some dirt and scratches incorporated that look nice when viewed up close. But those muddy textures from before almost work to the benefit of the original model, as they tied in nicely with that dirty, war-torn look of the model as a whole. Other characters like Kim or Carmine do at least appear to be a net improvement, as those higher poly counts and texture details help a great deal in creating a more convincing-looking human character than the exaggerated, almost cartoon-like designs from before. There's even new details like this scar on Kim's upper lip that weren't visible previously. So it's really just the lead characters that seem to have a bit of personality stripped away, which is even more evident when viewing some of the reworked cinematics. In general, all the new cinematics are a fantastic improvement, with better camera angles, transitions, significantly improved character animations, and pacing. However, all that harsh two-point lighting used in the original that contributed so much to the tone of those sequences has been replaced with this excessive bloom and multi-point lighting regardless of the scene. and many of the changed camera angles and zoom levels, along with other tweaks, occasionally are less impactful than the originals, and seem to alter the intent of those cinematic moments. Next, let's see how the game's environments have changed. Gears of War Ultimate, and now Reloaded, offer a substantial improvement technically when it comes to the rendering of its environments over the original versions of the game. With higher quality texture maps, more complex geometry, improved object models, redone skyboxes, and completely overhauled background details. However, the spatial data has been maintained exactly due to them using the original code here. So, spacing between cover, for example, locations of enemy spawns, most item placement, and other gameplay related details are generally the same despite that totally reworked visual style. This is where I feel both Ultimate and Reloaded benefit the most, as I feel most of the changes made are not only faithful to the original vision of the game, but do enhance the presence of each area. The city of Ephyra is beautifully reimagined, with all the key architecture remaining in place, while theme-appropriate architecture has been added in to enhance the look and feel of the backdrop. More generic-looking structures like those large rectangular skyscrapers and office buildings have been replaced with more theme-appropriate ruins, often further in the distance as well, creating a much greater sense of space within this apocalyptic cityscape. The city streets that previously appeared mostly empty are filled with new details like wrecked cars, broken concrete slabs, vegetation overgrowth, and other small details like tire skid marks and trash, all enhancing that dense, abandoned city feel. Every single texture map has been replaced, with much higher fidelity textures and improved normal mapping, once again contributing to the density of the scene. Geometry for pre-existing assets has been redone, making large pieces of rubble like this one look more natural in the space than the overly polygonal look of the environmental cover used before. And texture filtering, along with the general LOD, has been massively improved, avoiding very prevalent issues like this from the original PC version. Interior spaces appear to have seen the biggest improvements though, as these areas in the original games were basically empty, and were rarely given any narrative purpose outside of serving as a bridge to the next combat arena outside. But now, they are fully populated with unique assets, and often provide some strong environmental storytelling too, enhancing the game's unique world and premise. Like with the character models, not every change here betters the artistic direction of the game. Some redone assets, like these statues, look too clean compared to the original versions. The same is true with some of the brickwork and cobblestone, that, while definitely a higher fidelity in these later versions, that clean white marble look of a lot of these redone assets fails to carry forward that dark, dingy look of the original, making the city look less ruined than it did before. But one of the most surprising downgrades with the environmental design presents itself in one of the later chapters, as players explore the emulsion caves deep underground. This area previously had a very wide open, expansive feel to it in some areas, with lots of stalagmites and stalactites surrounded by thick glowing yellow emulsion, giving it a unique and memorable appearance in the campaign. And while the general pathing and overall design of this area remains exactly the same, there's this bizarre lack of distant detail that was present before with these same vantage points. Lighting is where Gears of War Ultimate and Reloaded appears to deviate the most from the original game's art direction. Every single scene, whether it's a cinematic or in-game, looks and feels considerably different than Epic's original classic, with much brighter ambient lighting that, while certainly a technical improvement, doesn't carry the same tonal weight as the original game's iconic low-saturated look. Gears of War's theme is generally depressing and grim, with the overwhelming odds stacked heavily against the heroes in an unforgiving, post-apocalyptic, war-torn world. And a big part of that tone was that original game's extremely limited color palette. This was, of course, exacerbated by Unreal Engine 3's general lighting and post-processing pipeline, though the developers did opt to lean into this to create the game's unique look. Gears Ultimate and Reloaded attempt to bring some color back into the franchise, similar to how more recent Gears of War games are tonally designed. It's not quite as colorful as something like Far Cry, but there's certainly a cooler color tone to this remake that changes the feel of the experience. This is most evident when playing through the more night-oriented sequences, as the oppressive shadows of these moments are now brightened up with these more recent versions, making it much easier to navigate, but arguably spoiling some of the light scares scattered throughout. All that being said, Gears Reloaded's lighting is not all bad. In fact, it's a huge improvement technically. Lighting in the original game may have had a distinct style to it, but it was extremely crude as well, with harsh, bleached out highlights that washed out almost all the detail with any object relative to the angle viewed. Reflective surfaces looked terrible, and failed to properly represent what those materials actually look like in reality. The newer Gears of War versions utilize PBR elements, allowing light to react to specific materials as you'd expect. Fabric, for example, will absorb light, while material like metal has a more subtle gleam to it. The remake utilizes a pre-computed global illumination technique called light mass to bake in more scene-accurate lighting for each area, creating a more natural and believable space than the static light maps that were used before. Characters are also lit differently, with light mass allowing models to sample indirect lighting via pre-computed lighting volumes, rather than having to rely solely on per-pixel lighting and screen space ambient occlusion to fake it. This means that when you're transitioning from light to dark environments, it's much smoother than before, as characters seem to actually be reacting to the lighting seen in-game, rather than just kind of faking the light interaction with spatial triggers. Shadows are improved in the same way. The original game utilized static baked shadows mixed with dynamic stencils for character models, and rough shadow buffers to help simulate softness along the edges. The result being very inconsistent shadow projections relative to the baked light maps that don't seem to hold up very well when observed directly. Gears Reloaded, on the other hand, uses light mass for its environmental shadows, which greatly improves the look and feel of each location, and also contributes greatly to that sense of depth I mentioned previously. Character model shadows are still rendered in mostly the same way as before, but there's improvements here too, like improved shadow rendering quality and interaction with materials that look more realistic. Next up, we have the effects. Gears of War features quite a few effects, mostly related to things like explosions, fire, and, of course, lots of over-the-top violence. Gears Ultimate and Reloaded greatly improve most of these features, especially fire effects that are not only visually superior to those original alpha textures, but also more numerous, as they've been added to areas all over to enhance that war-torn atmosphere. Particle density in general has also been greatly bumped up, which is most noticeable during these big firefights with multiple enemies. However, like with how the lighting direction has been altered, the appearance of blood in the game has lost a lot of its visual prominence, which I feel takes away greatly from the game altogether. Other effects like water rendering are improved slightly, albeit they're not quite as prominent enough to really matter much in the gameplay. Though I do appreciate the improvements made to the way water appears in scenes like this one, where that excessively shiny look of the tree bark before always looked bizarre. However, it is odd how much is missing from the underground caves and tunnels throughout the game, as the original game's mysterious black liquid effects that would drain down into these locust holes are completely removed for some reason, and the emulsion gas effects seen floating near the tops of locust holes and all throughout the cave chapters are missing as well, which feels like a huge missed opportunity. Even the smoke effects from the player's Lancer chainsaw are removed, though this is likely to bring it more in line with the design of the Lancer in later games. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which game do you feel has the superior audio quality and design?
Marcus, flank left!
Oh! Yeah!
Got one!
Well then, okay. Now, let's drop the hammer. Well then, okay. Now, let's drop the hammer.
There it is. Now what?
We mess it up.
What? Shit. There it is. Now what?
Now, we piss it up.
What?
And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Gears of War Reloaded on the PC seems to be a decent remaster of a remake made from a game nearly 20 years old now. It doesn't do much to address complaints about the artistic changes made that run counter to the original game's design, though it does address problems inherent with that previous 2015 release. The game is more stable on PC, with buttery smooth performance and plenty of flexibility for modern hardware, allowing for higher resolutions and frame rates. The game also runs beautifully for both Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, the latter of which offers its own unique benefits like support for the DualSense controller, and for the PS5 Pro, there's PSSR support, alongside improved shadow rendering and screen space reflections. What's most impressive though, is that the Coalition built this latest release to be fully crossplay enabled, allowing friends on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation to all cut down the locust together for the first time. For both longtime and new fans alike, this is absolutely a quality release for a classic third-person shooter. I maintain that artistically, the Coalition's remake doesn't quite match the original vision as well as it could have, despite objectively superior visuals across the board. But it's in no way a bad-looking game either, and it delivers a more competent overall experience than the original thanks to its improved cinematics. But what do you guys think? Do you like how Gears of War Reloaded looks? Or do you still prefer the original? Let me know in the comment section. And don't forget to like and subscribe for coverage on all the latest games, including my next video on Metal Gear Solid Delta coming soon.